Before we step into one of the oldest mysteries in human history, I want to ask for your help. If you're enjoying this content, please use your hype points on this video. It helps the channel more than you could possibly know. If you're listening on Spotify, leaving a review makes an enormous difference for us. And if you want, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're listening from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is tuning in from across the globe. If you enjoy these deep dives into history's most puzzling corners, consider subscribing. It means everything. A massive thank you to Dogface680 and Sleepy Koala for suggesting this story. This one's for you. Now let's talk about a man who never died. The antediluvian period. The age before the Great Flood. A time when humans reportedly lived for centuries, when the Earth was young, and when the boundary between the terrestrial and the celestial was, according to ancient accounts, far more permeable than it would later become. Enoch appears in Genesis chapter 5. His entry in the genealogical record is peculiar. Where other patriarchs receive formulaic descriptions, lived so many years, fathered children, then died. Enoch's passage breaks the pattern. Born to Jared, father of Methuselah, lived 365 years total, but that final phrase, walked with God, and he was not, for God took him, not died, took. The Hebrew verb is lakach, to take, to fetch, to capture, to seize. The same word used when describing the removal of an object from one location to another. In the vast chronicle of biblical genealogy, this phrasing is almost unique. It suggests not natural death, but intervention, extraction. Enoch lived during a period that, according to ancient texts, was marked by extraordinary events. The earth was populated not only by humans descended from Adam, but by other beings, entities the texts describe as coming from above. The timing matters. According to the genealogical timeline, Enoch was born approximately 622 years after creation, assuming a literal reading. He lived during the lifetimes of Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalaleel and Jared. He would have known the first humans. He would have heard their accounts firsthand. And then, at 365 years old, a suspiciously solar number, matching the days in an Earth year, he vanished. No explanation given in Genesis, no elaboration in the mainstream biblical text. Just a single line acknowledging that this patriarch, unlike every other human in the lineage, did not experience death as we understand it. For mainstream theology, this is a story of faith rewarded. Enoch walked so closely with the divine that mortality itself was bypassed. But there's another text, a book attributed to Enoch himself, and in that book, the disappearance takes on an entirely different meaning. The genealogical record preceding Enoch establishes a pattern. Adam lived 930 years and died. Seth lived 912 years and died. Enos lived 905 years and died. Canaan lived 910 years and died. Mahalaleel lived 895 years and died. Jared lived 962 years and died. The formula is consistent. Birth, procreation, lifespan, death. Over and over, the rhythm of mortality established as the baseline human experience. Then Enoch. The pattern breaks. The formula changes. Something happens that never happened before and would only happen once more in the entire biblical narrative. This isn't minor. In a text obsessed with genealogy, with establishing lineage and succession, with documenting who lived and died and who descended from whom, this disruption stands out. It demands explanation. And for thousands of years, theologians have provided one. Enos was righteous. So righteous that God made an exception. Death was bypassed as a special dispensation. But righteousness alone doesn't explain the mechanics. Noah was righteous too. Abraham, Moses, David, Solomon. None of them bypassed death. They died and were buried, and their tombs became landmarks. So what made Enoch different? What quality or experience or knowledge set him apart so dramatically that the normal rules simply didn't apply? The answer, according to the Book of Enoch, isn't moral superiority. It's what he witnessed, what he knew, what he recorded. Chapter 2. taken instead of buried. In ancient Near Eastern culture, burial was sacred. The location of a patriarch's remains mattered. It established territorial claims, tribal legitimacy, religious authority. Abraham's burial at Hebron, Joseph's bones carried from Egypt, Moses buried by divine hand in an unmarked location, but Enoch, nothing. No pilgrimage site, no sacred tomb, no shrine where descendants could connect with their ancestral lineage. The absence is conspicuous. Consider the pattern. When Scripture wants to honour someone, it preserves their resting place. When it wants to diminish someone, it erases their burial location or marks it with shame. But Enoch receives neither honour nor shame. He receives a mission. The word taken appears 47 times in Genesis alone, but almost always in contexts of possession, marriage, or sacrifice. Only with Enoch does it describe the end of a person's earthly existence. Early Jewish commentary wrestled with this. The Targum, an Aramaic paraphrase of Hebrew scripture, tried to clarify. Enoch worshipped in truth before the Lord, and behold, he was not with the inhabitants of the earth, for he was taken away, and he ascended to the firmament. Ascended. That's the addition. The original Hebrew doesn't specify upward movement, just removal. The question becomes, what requires removal rather than death? Contamination, perhaps. Exposure to something that made his continued presence among humans impossible, or information, knowledge, that couldn't be allowed to spread through natural generational transfer. In classified government operations, when someone knows too much, they aren't always eliminated. Sometimes they're isolated, contained, kept alive but sequestered, where their knowledge can't leak. Enoch's disappearance fits that pattern. He wasn't punished with death. He was separated, preserved but inaccessible. And according to the book he allegedly wrote, there was good reason for that separation. The absence of a burial site is particularly striking when compared to the elaborate attention given to other patriarchs. Abraham purchases the cave of Machpelah specifically as a burial site for his family. The transaction is documented in detail. The negotiation with Ephron the Hittite, the price paid, the legal transfer of property. The cave becomes a family tomb, housing Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Leah, and Jacob. Joseph makes the Israelites swear an oath that they'll carry his bones out of Egypt when they leave. Centuries later, during the Exodus, Moses ensures this promise is kept. Joseph's bones travel through the wilderness and are eventually buried at Shechem, in the plot of ground Jacob had purchased. Moses himself, despite his unique relationship with the divine, dies and is buried. The location is kept secret, but the act of burial still occurs. His body is placed in the earth in the land of Moab, somewhere in the valley opposite Beth Peor. Even Aaron, Moses' brother, dies on Mount Hor and is buried there. The Israelites mourn him for 30 days. The location is known, the death is acknowledged. But Enoch? No location. No mourning period mentioned. No description of family gathering to honour his passing. Just the stark statement, he was not, for God took him. The linguistic construction is worth examining. In Hebrew, the phrase he was not uses the same terminology that appears elsewhere in Genesis to describe absence or non-existence. When Cain kills Abel, God asks where. Abel is. Cain responds, I do not know. Later the text states that Abel's blood cries out from the ground. Abel is dead, but his blood, his essence, his life, still exists in some form, crying out for justice. With Enoch there's no such continuation. He simply was not. Present one moment, absent the next. No transition described, no process detailed, just discontinuity. This kind of language typically appears in contexts of complete removal, when something is utterly gone, when the transition from presence to absence is absolute and irreversible. Except the Book of Enoch suggests it wasn't irreversible. He wasn't destroyed or annihilated. He was relocated, moved from one realm of existence to another, still present, but no longer accessible to ordinary humans. The distinction matters. Death is one kind of removal, but isolation is another, and the implications of isolation are very different from the implications of death. Chapter 3. the book that was not supposed to. Survive First Enoch, the Book of Enoch, one of the most influential texts you've probably never read. For centuries it was lost to Western scholarship. Fragments existed in Greek and Latin, tantalizing pieces that suggested a larger whole. But the complete text had vanished, seemingly erased from the historical record. Then, in 1773, Scottish explorer James Bruce returned from Ethiopia, carrying 3 copies of a complete manuscript. Written in Ge'ez, the ancient Ethiopian language, the book had survived in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where it remained canonical. The text itself claims to be Enoch's first-hand account, his testimony. Written before the flood, preserved through the cataclysm, passed down through uncertain channels until it emerged in the centuries before Christ. Scholars date its composition to sometime between the 3rd century before Christ and the 1st century after Christ. Though it claims to describe events from thousands of years earlier, the discrepancy matters to academics. But to believers in the text's authenticity, those dates simply reflect when older oral or written traditions were finally compiled into the form that survived. What's undeniable? The book was widely known in Second Temple Judaism. The Dead Sea Scrolls contained multiple copies. Early church fathers quoted it as scripture. Jude's epistle references it directly. Tertullian, Irenaeus, Origen, all treated it as authentic revelation, and then, gradually, it was removed. By the 4th century, most Christian denominations had excluded it from their canon. Too strange, too elaborate, too detailed in its cosmology and angelology. The official reasoning, questions about authorship, theological complexity, potential for misinterpretation. But reading the text itself, another reason emerges. The Book of Enoch doesn't just expand biblical narrative, it fundamentally reinterprets it. It takes the cryptic references in Genesis and explodes them into a detailed account of cosmic intervention, forbidden technology transfer, and entities that blur the line between spiritual and physical. It's a text that, if taken literally, suggests our ancient past was far stranger than mainstream history acknowledges. James Bruce's journey to Ethiopia was itself remarkable. He spent years in North Africa, learning languages, building relationships, navigating complex political situations. When he finally obtained copies of the Book of Enoch, he recognized their significance immediately. But upon his return to Europe, the reception was mixed. Some scholars were intrigued, others were skeptical. The text was so different from canonical scripture, so elaborate in its descriptions, so specific in its details, that many dismissed it as late fabrication. Pseudepigrapha, a text falsely attributed to an ancient figure to grant it authority. The problem with that dismissal: the Book of Enoch predates Christianity. Fragments found among the Dead Sea Scrolls date to the 2nd and 1st centuries before Christ. The community at Qumran, whoever they were, possessed multiple copies. They valued this text enough to reproduce it, study it, preserve it. The Dead Sea Scrolls discovery fundamentally changed scholarly understanding of Second Temple Judaism. Before 1946, when the first scrolls were found, scholars had to rely on later copies and references to reconstruct what Jews believed and practiced in the centuries before Christ. The scrolls provided direct evidence, primary sources from the period itself, and among those sources, Enoch, not just referenced or alluded to, but preserved in multiple copies. The Book of Watchers, the earliest section of First Enoch, appears in at least 11 different manuscript fragments. The astronomical book appears in 4 fragments, the Book of Dreams in multiple copies. This wasn't marginal literature at Qumran, this was core reading, important enough to copy by hand, which was expensive and time-consuming, important enough to preserve in the caves when the community faced destruction. The question becomes, why? What made this text so valuable to that particular community? One possibility: it explained things other texts left mysterious. Genesis chapter 6 mentions sons of God taking wives from among daughters of men. Who were these sons of God? What did their unions produce? Why did this lead to divine judgment? Genesis doesn't elaborate. Just a few verses, then the flood narrative begins, but the Book of Enoch explains, in detail, with names, locations, specific teachings, consequences, and a coherent narrative that connects the dots Genesis leaves scattered. For a community trying to understand their history, their relationship with the divine, the nature of evil and judgment, the Book of Enoch provided answers, not comfortable answers, not simple answers, but complete answers. And those answers painted a picture of human history that involved direct intervention, from non-human entities, technological transfer, genetic manipulation, a cosmos far more complex and populated than mainstream religion wanted to acknowledge. The early church fathers who quoted Enoch did so because they believed it was authentic. Tertullian, writing in the 2nd century after Christ, argued that the Book of Enoch was preserved through Noah and therefore survived the flood. He believed Enoch was a genuine prophet whose writings deserved scriptural status. Irenaeus, roughly contemporary with Tertullian, quoted Enoch when discussing angelology and the fall of rebellious angels. He treated the text as authoritative, as reliable testimony about events in deep history. Origen, writing in the 3rd century, was more cautious. He acknowledged the text's influence and widespread acceptance, but noted that it wasn't universally recognized as scripture. Still, he engaged with it seriously, treating it as valuable even if not canonical. But by the 4th century the tide had turned. When church councils met to determine which books belonged in the Bible and which didn't, the Book of Enoch didn't make the cut. Too controversial, too detailed in ways that created theological problems, too popular among groups the emerging Orthodox Church considered heretical. The Manichaeans liked Enoch. The Gnostics referenced it. Groups that the mainstream church was trying to suppress found value in its teachings. Guilt by association played a role in its exclusion. But there's another factor: control. A religion organised around hierarchical authority, around ordained clergy interpreting scripture for the masses, around centralised doctrine and uniform belief. Such a religion functions better with a limited, manageable set of texts. The Book of Enoch was neither limited nor manageable. It was sprawling, imaginative, filled with visions and journeys and revelations that didn't fit neatly into emerging orthodoxy. It described the divine realm in ways that made it seem less transcendent and more operational. Angels with specific jobs, cosmic structures that functioned according to rules, judgment that followed procedures. This wasn't the mystery that the church wanted to cultivate. This was detailed, specific, almost bureaucratic in its presentation of heavenly operations. So the book was set aside, removed from the canon, preserved in Ethiopia, where the church developed independently and made different choices about which texts mattered. Lost to Europe until James Bruce brought it back. And even then, for most of Christian history it remained obscure, a curiosity, something scholars studied but most believers never encountered. Until the late 20th century, when alternative history and ancient astronaut theory sparked renewed interest. Suddenly, people were asking the same questions again. What if the Book of Enoch wasn't mythology? What if it was testimony? What if Enoch really did witness what he claimed to witness and write what he claimed to write and get removed from human society because what he knew was too dangerous to allow free propagation? Chapter 4. The Watchers Descend. The Book of Enoch opens with a declaration. This is the testimony of Enoch, who witnessed things humans were never meant to see. The core narrative begins with the Watchers. In Hebrew tradition they're called the Irin, Holy Ones, angels assigned to observe humanity. But in Enoch's account, observation turns to intervention. 200 Watchers descend. The text is specific about the location, Mount Hermon, in the days of Jared, Enoch's father. They descend with purpose, with coordination, with a pact among themselves. And they don't come as spirits. They arrive with physical presence, they take human wives, they teach forbidden knowledge. The names of their leaders are recorded: Samyaza, Azazel, Amaros, Barakel, Kokabiel, Tamiel, Ramiel. Each one assigned specific areas of instruction. Azazel teaches metallurgy, the crafting of weapons, of swords and knives and shields, the technology of war. Amaros teaches sorcery, what the text calls enchantments and the cutting of roots. Pharmaceutical knowledge, perhaps, the manipulation of plants for altered consciousness or healing. Barakel teaches astrology, the observation of stars, the calculation of celestial movements, astronomical knowledge that allowed prediction and navigation. Coverup teaches astronomy itself, the identification of constellations, what the text calls the knowledge of signs. The pattern is clear. These beings arrive with technical information, not religious instruction, not moral teaching. Practical, applicable knowledge in metallurgy, agriculture, cosmetics, medicine, warfare, and astronomy. Knowledge that, according to the text, humans were not supposed to possess, at least not yet, and certainly not through this channel. The conspiracy interpretation is straightforward. Advanced knowledge appears in human civilization suddenly, not through gradual discovery, but through transmission. The archaeological record shows technological leaps that seem discontinuous with prior development, writing systems that emerge fully formed, astronomical knowledge that requires centuries of observation appearing in early civilizations without apparent precedent. The Book of Enoch provides an explanation. It was given, taught, transferred from beings who already possessed it, and the result, according to the text, was catastrophe. Mount Hermon is a real place, a mountain on the border between modern Syria and Lebanon. Rising over 9,000 feet, it's the highest point in the region, snow-capped most of the year, visible from vast distances. In ancient times it was considered a sacred site. Multiple cultures built shrines there. The name itself means forbidden place, or devoted thing in Hebrew, a mountain set apart. According to the Book of Enoch, this is where the Watchers made their pact. They bound themselves by mutual oaths. Each agreed to participate. Each took responsibility for what would happen next. They descended together, 200 entities committing to a course of action they knew was forbidden. The text preserves their oath. Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual execrations not to abandon this plan but to do this thing. This isn't impulsive. This isn't individual rebellion. This is coordinated conspiracy, a decision made collectively, with full awareness of consequences, with each participant holding the others accountable. Why Mount Hermon specifically? The text doesn't say, but the location matters. High altitude, remote, visible from great distances but difficult to access. A liminal space, neither fully of the earth nor separate from it. A threshold. The descent itself is described in physical terms, not spiritual manifestation, not mystical vision. The Watchers come down from somewhere and arrive on the mountain. The language suggests movement through space, transition from one location to another, and what they bring with them changes everything. The specific knowledge transfers are worth examining in detail. As Zazel's teachings in metallurgy, the text mentions specifically the crafting of swords, knives, shields, breastplates, defensive and offensive weapons, the technology of organized warfare. Before this, according to the narrative, conflicts would have been personal, using whatever tools were at hand. After Azazel's instruction, warfare becomes systematic. Weapons are crafted specifically for killing. Defences are engineered specifically for protection. The arms race begins. Amaros teaches what the text calls the resolving of enchantments. This is often interpreted as magic, but the language suggests something more practical. The manipulation of natural substances to produce specific effects, herbal medicine, poisons, psychoactive compounds, the ability to alter consciousness, heal wounds, or cause harm through chemical means, rather than physical violence. Barakel teaches astrology, not in the modern horoscope sense, but in the ancient sense of understanding celestial mechanics. The movements of planets, the cycles of stars, the ability to predict astronomical events, create calendars, navigate by the heavens, knowledge that allows planning, agriculture, long-distance travel, but also knowledge that reveals patterns, that suggests the cosmos operates according to discoverable rules rather than divine whim. Coverup teaches the signs of the stars, Perhaps the identification of specific constellations, the naming of celestial objects, the mapping of the night sky. Cultural knowledge that unifies communities around shared understanding of the heavens. Tamil teaches astronomy, specifically what the text calls the signs of the sun, solar knowledge, the solstices and equinoxes, the relationship between sun, earth and seasons, agricultural timing, the foundations of calendar systems, the pattern across all these teachings, technical knowledge, practical information, skills that provide immediate benefit but also fundamentally alter human capabilities. And according to the text, this wasn't evolution. This wasn't gradual discovery through trial and error over generations. This was instruction. Direct transfer from beings who already possessed the knowledge to humans who didn't. The archaeological record presents puzzles here. Certain technologies appear suddenly in the historical record. Writing systems emerge fully formed, not as gradual development from simple symbols to complex scripts. Astronomical knowledge appears in ancient civilizations, Sumerian, Egyptian, Mesoamerican, that seems to require centuries of careful observation, yet appears without clear precedent. Standard archaeology explains this through cultural diffusion, through independent invention, through the assumption that early humans were far more sophisticated than often credited, and those explanations likely account for most technological development. But the Book of Enoch offers an alternative. At least some knowledge wasn't discovered. It was taught, given, transferred from outside. The text is clear about the consequences. The knowledge corrupts, not because the information itself is evil, but because humans aren't ready. They don't have the wisdom to handle the power. Metallurgy leads to better weapons, which leads to more efficient killing. Cosmetics lead to vanity and social hierarchies based on appearance. Astronomical knowledge leads to astrology, to determinism, to the belief that the stars control human fate. Each piece of knowledge in isolation seems neutral or even beneficial. But the combined effect, according to Enoch's account, is social collapse. Violence increases, inequality emerges. Humans begin to see themselves not as equals under divine authority, but as competitors in a hierarchy determined by knowledge, beauty and power. And the Watchers, having set this process in motion, don't stop it. They participate, they take human wives, they produce offspring, they become enmeshed in human society rather than remaining observers. The boundary between human and divine, already breached by the knowledge transfer, dissolves further through reproduction. And what results is something the text treats as abomination, hybrid beings that belong fully to neither realm. Chapter 5. Forbidden Knowledge. Why would knowledge itself be forbidden? The text is explicit. The Watchers are judged not for descending, but for teaching. The crime isn't presence, it's education. This inverts typical moral frameworks. Usually knowledge is virtue, ignorance is the problem. But in Enoch's account, certain information destabilizes. It corrupts. It leads not to enlightenment, but to destruction. Consider the specific categories. Weapons technology. Humanity learns to kill more efficiently. Tribal conflicts escalate. Violence spreads. The text describes how knowledge of swords and shields leads to warfare on an unprecedented scale. Before this instruction, conflicts were limited by available tools. After, wars become systematic, organised, deadly, cosmetics, and adornment. The text mentions this specifically. The use of antimony for eyes, precious stones, dyes. This seems trivial compared to weapons, but the social implications are profound. Appearance becomes a form of power. Beauty becomes commodified. Social hierarchies emerge based on who can afford adornment and who cannot. Vanity, envy, and inequality follow. Pharmaceutical knowledge, the cutting of roots and enchantment suggests mind-altering substances, drugs, poisons, the ability to heal and harm through chemistry. This knowledge gives power over life and death in ways that don't depend on physical strength or skill. Anyone who understands the plants can kill anyone else, regardless of physical disparity. The power balance shifts. Astronomical knowledge, the stars as navigation tools, calendars, agricultural timing. But also something more. The text suggests this knowledge revealed structure in the cosmos, order, systems, as if humanity was being shown that reality operates according to rules that can be understood and potentially manipulated. This undermines religious authority based on mystery and divine unpredictability. Each category of knowledge grants power, but power without wisdom, according to the text, leads directly to the chaos that precedes the flood. The philosophical question is profound. Can knowledge itself be dangerous? Is there information that humans, or any species, might be better off not possessing? Modern ethics generally says no. Information is neutral. Application determines morality. A knife can cut food or kill a person. The knife itself has no moral valence. But the Book of Enoch suggests otherwise. It suggests that certain knowledge, given to a civilization not yet ready to handle it, inevitably leads to harm, not because the knowledge is used immorally, but because its mere presence in the social ecosystem creates instabilities that spiral out of control. This is the logic behind classified information in modern governments. Nuclear weapons technology isn't kept secret because the information itself is evil. It's kept secret because proliferation creates risks that outweigh benefits. The more entities that possess the knowledge, the higher the probability of catastrophic use. The Watchers, in this interpretation, committed the ultimate act of proliferation. They gave humans knowledge of weapons, drugs, social manipulation, and cosmic structure before human civilization had developed the ethical frameworks to handle that information responsibly. And once given, knowledge can't be ungiven. It spreads. It replicates. It persists across generations. The Book of Enoch describes divine judgment falling on the Watchers specifically for this act of teaching. The sexual unions are mentioned, the hybrid offspring are problematic, but the core crime is education. Revealing what should have remained hidden, transferring what should have remained exclusive. Enoch becomes the mediator in this crisis. He's chosen, why him specifically is never fully explained, to serve as messenger between the realms. He carries the complaints of humanity to the heavens, and he carries the judgment of the divine back to the Watchers. The text preserves his message to the rebellious angels. You have been in heaven but have not known all the mysteries of God. You have known only what was revealed to you. You have committed great sin by teaching humans secrets that were not meant for them. The phrasing is significant. The Watchers aren't accused of inventing false knowledge. They taught genuine secrets, real information. But information humans weren't supposed to have. This frames the fall not as deception, but as premature revelation. The knowledge was true, but its timing was wrong. Its recipients were unprepared. The message Enoch delivers is unambiguous. The knowledge transfer must stop. The corruption it's caused cannot be undone, only judged. The flood is coming. But Enoch doesn't just deliver messages. According to the text, he witnesses. He travels. He's taken beyond the normal boundaries of human experience to see things that explain the nature of the intervention. And what he describes sounds less like mystical vision, and more like direct observation of structures and systems that exist independent of human perception. The question of forbidden knowledge extends beyond ancient history. Modern science has repeatedly confronted similar ethical dilemmas. Should certain experiments be conducted? Should certain technologies be developed? Should certain information be published? The debate over gain-of-function research in virology mirrors the Enochian concern. If scientists can make viruses more dangerous to better understand them, should they? The knowledge gained might prevent future pandemics, but the knowledge gained might also enable the creation of bioweapons. The information itself, once it exists, carries risk. Nuclear physics, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering. Each field contains knowledge that grants extraordinary power and extraordinary potential for catastrophic misuse. The Book of Enoch suggests this isn't a modern dilemma, it's an ancient pattern. Knowledge transfers that happen too early, to civilizations not ready to handle them, lead to collapse, and those who facilitate such transfers, even with good intentions, bear responsibility for the consequences. Chapter 6. The Nephilim, the Offspring. Genesis mentions them briefly. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown. The book of Enoch expands this into detailed narrative. The Watchers take human wives. The unions produce children, but these children are not normal humans. The text describes them as giants, enormous in stature, voracious in appetite. They consume everything available, crops, animals, and eventually, according to the account, humans themselves. They're described as being 300 cubits in height in some versions. If a cubit is 18 inches, that's 450 feet, obviously hyperbolic or corrupted in transmission. Other traditions suggest more modest but still extraordinary heights, 10 to 15 feet. Some scholars suggest the measurement refers not to height, but to some other attribute, perhaps reach, or the size of their territory, or a symbolic rather than literal dimension. Size aside, the key detail is their nature, hybrid beings, part human, part something else. Their existence represents a fundamental corruption of what humans were supposed to be. The text is explicit about their behaviour. They consume the labour of humans, eating the food that farmers produce faster than it can be replenished. When food runs out, they turn to consuming animals. When animals run out, some versions of the text suggest they turn to consuming humans themselves. This creates an unsustainable situation. The Nephilim, by their very existence, exhaust resources. They cannot be integrated into normal human society because their needs exceed what that society can provide. They become parasitic, draining the ecosystem of everything necessary for ordinary human survival. The Book of Enoch describes humanity crying out for relief. Prayers ascend to the heavens. The situation on earth has become intolerable. The Nephilim dominate. Violence is universal. The social fabric has disintegrated. And the divine response, according to the text, is judgment, but not immediate judgment. First, investigation. Angels are sent to assess the situation. Enoch is brought into the process as witness and messenger. The full extent of the corruption must be documented before action is taken. This procedural approach is striking. The text doesn't describe impulsive divine wrath. It describes deliberation, assessment, a decision-making process that involves multiple entities and follows structured protocols. The judgment, when it comes, targets multiple levels. The Nephilim themselves must be destroyed. The Watchers must be bound and imprisoned. The knowledge they taught must be, if not erased, at least contained so it doesn't proliferate further, and the earth itself must be cleansed through the flood. Modern conspiracy theorists connect the Nephilim to several phenomena. Giant skeletal remains. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers regularly reported discoveries of enormous skeletons, 7 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet. The reports are concentrated in certain regions, the American Midwest, the Ohio River Valley, parts of the Middle East. Most of these accounts lack photographic evidence. The skeletons, if they existed, have disappeared. Standard explanations, exaggeration, misidentification of mastodon or other large animal bones, hoaxes designed to attract attention or sell newspapers. But the sheer volume of reports suggests something was being found. Perhaps not 15-foot giants, but individuals significantly taller than average. In eras before modern nutrition, when average height was considerably shorter than today, a person 7 feet tall would have seemed gigantic. Their bones, discovered centuries later, might have sparked speculation about ancient races of giants. The Smithsonian Institution has been repeatedly accused of suppressing evidence of giant remains. The accusation: skeletons that don't fit conventional narratives of human evolution are quietly removed from the record, stored in archives inaccessible to the public, or even destroyed. The institution denies this. They maintain that no credible evidence of giant human remains has ever been presented to them, and that claims of suppression are conspiracy theories without factual basis. But the persistence of the accusation suggests either a massive coordinated hoax spanning more than a century, or alternatively, that something about the giant skeleton reports touches on uncomfortable questions about human origins and diversity. Megalithic structures, Baalbek in Lebanon, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, Sacsayhuaman in Peru, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, structures built with blocks weighing hundreds of tons, moved and positioned with precision that challenges explanation using known ancient technology. Standard archaeology explains these through human ingenuity. Lever systems, ramps, rollers, vast labour forces organised over decades. And for many megalithic sites, these explanations are probably correct, but some structures push the boundaries. The trilithon at Baalbek consists of 3 stones, each weighing approximately 800 tons. They're positioned 20 feet above ground level. Modern. Cranes can lift such weights, but require extensive support infrastructure. How did Bronze Age or Iron Age civilizations accomplish this? The conspiracy hypothesis: they didn't. At least not alone. Either they had help from beings with capabilities beyond human norms, or they possessed technology that was later lost, or the structures date from an earlier or advanced civilization than mainstream history acknowledges. The Book of Enoch doesn't specifically mention megalithic construction, but it describes beings of extraordinary size and strength, hybrid offspring of human and non-human parents, living on Earth before the flood. If such beings existed and possessed capabilities beyond normal humans, might they have participated in construction projects that still stand as evidence of their existence? Mythological consensus. Virtually every ancient culture has giant legends. The Greek titans and giants engaged in wars with the Olympian gods. The Norse Jotnar living in the realms beyond, Midgard. The Hindu Daityas and Danavas, demonic giants in conflict with the gods. Native American traditions across dozens of tribes describing cannibalistic giants, stone giants, ice giants, Celtic legends of the Fomorians, Sumerian references to the Anunnaki. The geographic and cultural distribution suggests either universal human psychology, projecting size onto feared enemies, or shared memory of an actual phenomenon. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious suggests that certain archetypes appear across cultures because they are embedded in human psychology. The giant is symbol of primal chaos, of nature's power, of the challenges that must be overcome to establish civilization. But the Book of Enoch offers an alternative. Giants appear in every culture's mythology because giants actually existed. The memory of them persisted through oral tradition long after the beings themselves were destroyed. The flood eliminated the Nephilim, but the memory of their existence survived. Through Noah and his family, then diffused across the globe as human populations spread and diversified after the flood. The Book of Enoch treats the Nephilim not as myth, but as historical fact. They existed, they wreaked havoc, and their existence was the direct result of forbidden mixing, the crossing of boundaries that were meant to remain fixed. The judgment that follows is total. The Nephilim cannot be allowed to survive. They represent a corruption of human genetics that, if allowed to propagate, would fundamentally alter what it means to be human. The flood serves, among other purposes, as a cleansing mechanism, a genetic reset. Only Noah and his family survive, preserving the uncorrupted human lineage. Everyone else, including all the Nephilim, perishes, but the text suggests something survived. The knowledge, the technology, the memory, and perhaps, according to some interpretations, some genetic material. The phrase, and also afterward in Genesis, suggests that Nephilim appeared again after the flood. How? If all were destroyed in the deluge, where did post-flood giants come from? Possible explanations. The genetic capacity for giantism remained latent in the human population, or some watchers escaped judgment and resumed their activities afterward. Or the term Nephilim refers not just to the specific pre-flood hybrids, but to any humans who achieve extraordinary size or power through whatever means. Regardless, the Nephilim represent what happens when boundaries meant to be inviolate are crossed, when species that should remain separate mix, when knowledge that should remain exclusive is shared, and Enoch, who witnessed it all, who wrote it down, becomes the living link to that pre-flood world. a world so corrupted that total destruction was the only solution. Chapter 7. Enoch's Journey Beyond Earth. The most extraordinary sections of the Book of Enoch describe his travels. He's taken from Earth, guided through realms that exist beyond normal human access, and what he witnesses is described in language that sounds less like spiritual metaphor and more like direct observation. Enoch describes multiple heavens, layered cosmic zones, each with distinct characteristics, each populated by different entities, each governed by specific rules and hierarchies. In the first heaven, he sees the treasury of snow and ice, the storehouses where weather phenomena are kept until needed. Angels assigned to meteorology manage these resources, releasing them according to fixed schedules. The description suggests structure, management, the weather as a controlled system rather than random chaos. In the second heaven, he encounters imprisoned angels, beings held in darkness awaiting judgment. The text describes their crimes: pride, rebellion, teaching forbidden knowledge. They exist in a state of suspension, neither free nor destroyed, confined until a predetermined time when final judgment will occur. The third heaven, in some versions of the Enochian literature, contains paradise, a garden more beautiful than Eden, trees bearing fruit that provide eternal life, rivers flowing with living water. This is where the righteous dead reside, awaiting resurrection. But it also contains, according to some accounts, a place of torment, a region of fire and darkness where the wicked experience preliminary punishment before final judgment. The juxtaposition is striking. Paradise and perdition existing in the same cosmic zone, separated only by boundary mechanisms that prevent interaction. Enoch describes angels organized in hierarchies, some responsible for weather, some for seasons, some for recording human deeds, some for punishing the wicked, some for praising continuously. Each group has specific assignments, specific territories, specific authorities. This sounds less like the traditional Christian conception of angels as purely spiritual beings whose primary function is worship, and more like a vast bureaucratic organization, entities with jobs, responsibilities, territories, chains of command. He witnesses the prison house of the stars. This phrase appears repeatedly and is among the most striking in the entire text. Stars are not just luminous objects in the sky. They are beings, or they are controlled by beings, and they are kept in specific locations, released according to schedules, then returned to their holding places. The language suggests stars have volition. They can obey or disobey. Those that fail to appear at their appointed times are punished. Those that appear too early or too late face consequences. The stars follow laws, and there are enforcement mechanisms to ensure compliance. Enoch describes seeing gates, entry points between cosmic zones, doorways that open at specific times, allowing passage of certain entities while restricting others. The eastern gate through which the sun rises, the western gate through which it sets, northern and southern gates for stars following different paths. These gates aren't metaphorical. They're described as physical structures with guardians, angels stationed to control access, protocols determining who can pass and when. The cosmos as a secured facility with controlled entry points. He describes seeing the earth from above. The text mentions viewing the earth as a circle surrounded by the Great Sea. This matches how the earth appears from high altitude, a curved surface surrounded by ocean. How would someone in the antediluvian period know this? If Enoch never left the ground, he'd have no frame of reference for describing the Earth's shape from an external perspective. The most detailed sections describe mechanisms controlling the sun and moon. Enoch witnesses gates through which these luminaries pass, chariots that carry them across the sky, assigned angels responsible for their movements, mathematical precision in their paths and cycles, traditional interpretation. These are mystical visions, metaphorical journeys through spiritual realities that can't be understood literally. Enoch is having religious experiences, perceiving divine truth through symbolic imagery his culture could comprehend. Conspiracy interpretation. Enoch is describing what he actually saw, not through vision, but through direct experience. He was taken somewhere, shown something, transported to vantage points that provided perspectives impossible from Earth's surface. And he tried to explain it using the only vocabulary available to a man living thousands of years before modern astronomy and technology. Consider this passage from 1 Enoch chapter 18. I saw the winds on the earth carrying the clouds. I saw the paths of the angels. I saw at the end of the earth the firmament of heaven above. Then I went towards the south, and it was burning day and night, where there were 7 mountains of precious stones. This reads like travel narrative, geographic description, movement through physical space toward observable features. He sees winds as discrete entities with paths. He observes the firmament, the boundary between atmospheric and cosmic space. He travels south to a region of extreme heat where mountains of unusual composition exist. Or this, from chapter 21. Then I went to another place more terrible than the former. I saw something terrible, a great fire there which burnt and blazed. The place had a cleft reaching into the abyss, full of great descending columns of fire. Neither its extent nor magnitude could I see, nor could I perceive its origin. A volcanic region? A geothermal area? Something burning deep beneath the Earth's surface? Enoch describes what he sees with the precision of someone making direct observations, noting details, acknowledging the limits of his understanding when confronted with phenomena beyond his experience. The 20th century Enochian scholar R.H. Charles translated and extensively annotated 1st Enoch. His analysis noted that the astronomical sections contain knowledge that seems anachronistic for the claimed period of composition. The movements of sun, moon and stars are described with mathematical precision. The calendar systems outlined require sophisticated observation and calculation. Charles concluded this proved the text was composed in the centuries before Christ, not in the antediluvian period. Later Jewish scholars, studying astronomy and calendar systems, attributed their knowledge to the ancient figure of Enoch to grant it authority. But another interpretation exists. The knowledge in the text is genuinely ancient. Enoch witnessed cosmic mechanisms firsthand. He recorded what he saw. Those observations were preserved, perhaps imperfectly, through oral tradition and later written compilation. What seems anachronistic is actually information from an earlier age that happened to be correct. The conspiracy doesn't require that Enoch literally flew through space in the modern sense. It simply suggests he went somewhere, saw something, was shown things that provided perspectives on Earth, cosmos, and the mechanisms underlying both that no one rooted to Earth's surface could possess. And whoever, or whatever, took him, apparently wanted him to document what he saw, wanted the information preserved, wanted testimony of cosmic structure and hierarchy and mechanisms to exist in human record. But perhaps they didn't want it widely distributed. Perhaps Enoch's removal served dual purposes. Reward for righteousness, yes, but also containment of a witness whose detailed testimony was too revelatory to allow free propagation through normal human channels. Chapter 8. Why the book was removed. By the 4th century after Christ, the Book of Enoch was effectively removed from most Christian biblical canons. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept it. A few fringe groups maintained copies, but for mainstream Christianity, it became apocryphal, interesting but not authoritative, useful for historical context but not for establishing doctrine. The official reasons provided by early church authorities, authorship questions. Scholars doubted Enoch actually wrote it. The linguistic style, the cultural references, the theological concepts all suggested composition in the centuries before Christ, rather than in the antediluvian period. If Enoch didn't write it, then treating it as his testimony was misleading. Theological problems. The text's elaborate angelology conflicted with emerging orthodox doctrines about the nature of angels, free will, and divine sovereignty. It described angels as having too much autonomy, too much physicality, too much capacity for independent action. Orthodox theology wanted angels to be purely spiritual beings whose every action reflected direct divine will. The Book of Enoch presented them as entities with their own agendas, capable of rebellion, operating within a structured hierarchy that looked more like civil service than worship, sectarian associations. The book was popular among groups later deemed heretical. The Manichaeans referenced it. Gnostic sects valued it. Groups that mainstream Christianity was actively suppressing found in Enoch's visions validation for their own alternative cosmologies. By the logic of guilt by association, if heretics valued the text itself became suspect. But reading the text with fresh eyes, another reason emerges. It's too specific, too material, too literal in its descriptions of divine beings operating according to rules and hierarchies that sound more like organizational bureaucracy than ineffable mystery. The Book of Enoch describes angels as having physical form, capable of eating, drinking, reproducing. It presents the cosmos as a managed system with gates, guards, schedules, and enforcement mechanisms. It portrays divine judgment not as abstract wrath, but as deliberate policy decisions made by councils and carried out by assigned agents who follow procedures. In short, it demystifies. It takes the transcendent and makes it operational. It takes the unknowable and provides detailed specifications. For religious authorities building a theology based on mystery, faith, and the incomprehensibility of the divine, this was deeply problematic. The Book of Enoch made heaven sound like an imperial administration. Angels sound like civil servants with specialized assignments. The divine realms sound like something that could be understood, mapped, and potentially navigated by anyone with sufficient information. It's one thing to worship an unknowable God beyond human comprehension. It's another to be told that reality is managed by a hierarchy of beings operating under fixed rules, some of whom have already rebelled, and all of whom are simply higher up the chain than humans rather than categorically different. The first model supports religious authority. Priests and clergy become necessary intermediaries between the incomprehensible divine and ordinary, humans who lack direct access. Mystery requires interpretation, and interpretation requires authorized interpreters. The second model undermines that authority structure. If the cosmos operates according to rules that can be understood, if angels are entities with specific jobs rather than incomprehensible manifestations of divine will, then the mystery dissolves. Knowledge replaces faith. Understanding replaces submission. The removal of the book from canon wasn't necessarily conspiracy in the sinister sense. It was curation, deciding which texts supported the theology being constructed and which texts complicated or contradicted that theology. Church councils in the 4th and 5th centuries were establishing orthodoxy. They were determining correct belief, excluding incorrect belief, defining what Christianity was and wasn't. In that context, texts had to be evaluated not just for authenticity, but for utility. Did they support the emerging consensus, or did they create problems? The Book of Enoch created problems, too many questions, too many alternative interpretations, too many opportunities for believers to develop ideas inconsistent with what church authorities wanted to teach, so it was set aside. Not banned, exactly, not destroyed, but excluded from the official collection, relegated to the category of interesting but non-essential. Preserved in Ethiopia, where the church developed independently and made different choices. Lost to Europe. But the effect was the same as suppression. A detailed account of pre-flood history, cosmic structure, and angelic rebellion was made inaccessible to most Christians. For over 1,000 years, European Christianity had no complete version of the Book of Enoch. Fragments existed, references appeared in other texts, but the full narrative was gone, until James Bruce brought it back. And even then, it remained obscure, something scholars studied, something referenced in academic discussions of Second Temple Judaism, but not something ordinary believers encountered or integrated into their understanding of biblical history. The late 20th and early 21st centuries changed this. The rise of alternative history, ancient astronaut theories, and internet-facilitated information sharing brought renewed attention to Enoch. Suddenly, people outside academic circles were reading the text, asking questions, drawing connections, and the questions were uncomfortable. If the Book of Enoch is authentic testimony, What does that mean about human history? About the nature of angels and demons? About the cosmos and humanity's place in it? About whether we're alone or have been monitored, influenced and occasionally directly contacted by non-human entities throughout our history? These aren't questions mainstream religion wants to answer, because the answers implied by taking the Book of Enoch seriously challenge fundamental assumptions about reality, divinity and human uniqueness. So the text remains marginalised, not forbidden, available to anyone who wants to read it, but not promoted, not integrated into standard religious education, not treated as authoritative by mainstream denominations. The effect? Most people have never heard of it, and those who have usually encounter it in the context of conspiracy theories or fringe biblical interpretation, rather than serious theology. But the book describes something. Whether mystical vision or literal observation, it presents a model of reality that doesn't fit conventional religious or scientific frameworks. A model where non-human entities visited Earth, taught humans, reproduced with humans, and fundamentally altered the course of human development before being judged and removed. And it's all attributed to the man who never died, the man who was taken, the man who witnessed and recorded events that others either couldn't see or chose not to document. Chapter 9. Echoes in Later History. Despite its removal from official canons, the Book of Enoch's influence persisted. Its ideas leaked through into mainstream theology, often unacknowledged or attributed to other sources. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered between 1946 and 1956 in caves near Qumran, contained multiple copies of Enochic material. Cave 1 yielded fragments of the astronomical book. Cave 4 contained the most extensive collection, remains of at least 11 different copies of various sections of 1st Enoch. The sheer volume of Enochic manuscripts at Qumran is significant. The community preserved more copies of Enoch than of most biblical books. Only Psalms, Deuteronomy and Isaiah appear in greater quantity. This suggests Enoch wasn't marginal literature at Qumran. It was core reading. The community at Qumran, whoever they were, most scholars identify them as Essenes, though this remains debated, valued these texts enough to copy them by hand, which was expensive and time-consuming. Important enough to preserve in the caves when the community faced destruction in the 1st century. The presence of Enoch at Qumran fundamentally changed scholarly understanding of Second Temple Judaism. Before the scrolls, scholars had to rely on later copies and references. The scrolls provided direct evidence from the period itself, and that evidence showed Enoch wasn't a fringe text. It was widely read and deeply valued. Early Christian writers quoted Enoch as scripture. The Epistle of Jude, accepted as canonical by most Christian denominations, references Enoch's prophecy directly. Behold, the Lord came with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all. That's a direct quote from 1st Enoch chapter 1. Not paraphrase, not allusion. Direct quotation, attributed to Enoch the 7th from Adam, treating him as a genuine prophet whose words carry authority. If Jude is scripture, and Jude quotes Enoch as authoritative, what does that say about Enoch's status? The question has troubled theologians for centuries. Most answer that Jude can quote a non-canonical text without endorsing everything in that text. Paul quoted pagan poets in his letters without making those poets scripture. Similarly, Jude can reference Enoch without requiring Enoch to be canonical. But the answer feels like rationalization. If a New Testament author quotes an ancient text, attributes it to a specific prophet, and uses it to support theological argument, that suggests the author considered the text reliable and authoritative. Tertullian, writing in the late 2nd and early 3rd century, argued explicitly that the Book of Enoch should be considered scripture. His reasoning? Enoch was a genuine prophet. Noah, who was righteous, must have preserved Enoch's writings through the flood. Therefore, the text survived authentically from the antediluvian period. Tertullian believed the book's exclusion from some collections was error, not wisdom. Irenaeus, roughly contemporary with Tertullian, quoted Enoch when discussing angelology and the fall of rebellious angels. He treated the text as authoritative historical testimony about events in the deep past. His theological arguments about the nature of evil and its origins depended partly on accepting Enoch's account as accurate. Origen, writing in the 3rd century, was more cautious. He acknowledged the text's influence and widespread acceptance, but noted that not everyone considered it canonical. He engaged with it seriously, treating it as valuable even if not definitively scriptural. His approach: it contains truth, but its authority remains debatable. By the 4th century, the tide had turned. Church councils meeting to determine biblical canon excluded Enoch. The reasons given: uncertain authorship, theological complexity, potential for misinterpretation, sectarian associations, but the text's influence didn't vanish. Ideas from Enoch leaked into mainstream Christianity through other channels. The elaborate hierarchy of angels, archangels, seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominions, powers, owes more to Enoch than to canonical scripture. The detailed descriptions of hell and its various levels of punishment show Enochic influence. The concept of fallen angels imprisoned in darkness awaiting judgment comes directly from Enoch. These ideas became so embedded in Christian thought that most believers assume they're biblical. They're not, at least not in the canonical texts. They're Enochic, preserved through influence, even as the source text was marginalized. Islamic tradition preserves Enoch as Idris. The Quran mentions him briefly in Surah Maryam. And mention in the book, Idris. Indeed, he was a man of truth and a prophet, and we raised him to a high station. Islamic commentary expands on this. Idris is identified as an antediluvian prophet who taught writing, astronomy and mathematics. He lived righteously and was elevated by divine favour. Some traditions claim he's the same figure as Enoch. Others distinguish them but acknowledge similar narratives. The description of being raised to a high station parallels the biblical God took him. Same essential mystery. A figure who doesn't die but is elevated or removed to another realm. Medieval Jewish mysticism incorporated Enochic themes into Kabbalistic thought. The 3rd book of Enoch, a later text composed around the 5th or 6th century, describes Enoch's transformation into Metatron, the highest of angels. In this tradition, Enoch doesn't just visit heaven, he becomes part of the celestial hierarchy, transformed from human into angelic being, serving as scribe and mediator in the heavenly court. This represents a development beyond 1st Enoch. The earlier text describes Enoch as witness and messenger, but still human. The later tradition describes actual transformation, apotheosis, a change in nature from mortal to immortal. Whether this reflects authentic tradition or medieval elaboration is debated, but it shows how the Enoch narrative continued to evolve, continued to fascinate, continued to generate speculation about what happened to the man who never died. The persistence across traditions, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, suggests the story resonated deeply. It answered questions other texts left ambiguous. Where do angels come from? What explains evil? Why does knowledge sometimes lead to destruction? What happened before the flood? Enoch provided answers. Maybe not comfortable answers. Maybe not answers that fit neatly into organised theology, but complete answers. Narratives that felt satisfying, even if disturbing. And the core mystery remained. Why would this particular man be removed from Earth? What made Enoch uniquely qualified, or uniquely dangerous to serve as witness and messenger? The text itself doesn't fully explain. Enoch is introduced as someone who walked with God, a phrase that suggests unusual intimacy with the divine but doesn't specify what that entailed. Was he simply righteous? Or did he possess qualities, curiosity, perceptiveness, trustworthiness, that made him suitable for a role no other human could fill? Or was he chosen randomly, plucked from the human population to serve as messenger simply because someone had to fill that role and he was available? The text doesn't say. It simply presents the fact. Enoch witnessed. Enoch recorded. Enoch was taken. And what he witnessed, according to his testimony, was cosmic intervention on a scale that fundamentally altered human history. Chapter 10. The reason Enoch could not return. The conspiracy theory, stripped to its essence, suggests this. Enoch witnessed something that couldn't be allowed to propagate through normal human channels. He saw the Watchers descend. He documented their teachings. He recorded the names, the technologies, the corruptions that followed. He travelled to regions beyond normal human access and saw how reality actually operates, not through mystery and faith, but through structure and administration. His writings, if widely distributed in his own time, would have fundamentally altered human understanding. They would have made clear that humanity was not alone, that beings from elsewhere had visited, intervened, and taught. That knowledge had been transferred rather than discovered, that the cosmos was organised, managed, controlled. This information was destabilising, not because it was false, but because it was true. So Enoch was removed, not killed. Death creates martyrs, and martyrs spread their message. Removed, taken to a place where he could be preserved but isolated, where his knowledge couldn't leak into the general population. The Book of Enoch survived not because Enoch himself wrote and distributed it during his lifetime, but because others preserved his accounts. Fragments passed down through oral tradition, copies made from earlier texts, eventually compiled into the written form that survived in Ethiopia while vanishing elsewhere. But the original witness? Gone. Taken at age 365, not as a reward, though righteousness may have played a role, not as punishment since the text portrays him positively, as containment, as quarantine of knowledge. This interpretation reframes the biblical account. Enoch's righteousness wasn't why he was taken. His knowledge was. He knew too much. He'd seen too much. And allowing him to live out a normal lifespan, teaching others, passing down detailed accounts of angelic intervention and cosmic structure, would have disrupted whatever plan was being executed. Consider the alternative. Enoch lives 365 years, witnesses everything described in his book, and then lives another 500 years, the typical lifespan for antediluvian patriarchs. He has children. The text mentions Methuselah, but doesn't specify others. He has grandchildren, great-grandchildren, multiple generations of descendants who hear his stories firsthand. He tells them about the Watchers, about the forbidden teachings, about the Nephilim, about his journeys through the heavens, about the cosmic mechanisms he witnessed, about the judgment that's coming. This information spreads. Each generation tells the next. The knowledge proliferates through human society. By the time of the flood, hundreds or thousands of people know what Enoch knew. Know that reality isn't what it seems. Know that beings from elsewhere visit and intervene. Know that humanity is monitored, managed, part of a larger system. That knowledge might alter behaviour, might inspire attempts to contact the Watchers again, might lead humans to view themselves differently, not as autonomous beings under divine sovereignty, but as participants in a cosmic hierarchy with entities both above and below them. The flood served as hard reset, but Enoch couldn't be allowed to survive even that. His memories, his detailed accounts, his testimony, too specific, too dangerous. So he was taken, before the flood, before the knowledge could spread beyond containment, and the few copies of his writings that survived did so through channels that kept them marginal, preserved in Ethiopia, where they couldn't influence mainstream Western Christianity, lost to Europe for over 1,000 years, rediscovered only when their revelations could be dismissed as ancient mythology rather than historical testimony. The age at which Enoch was taken is significant. 365 years, the number of days in a solar year. This can't be coincidental. The text is drawing connection between Enoch and solar phenomena, between his lifespan and cosmic cycles. Some interpreters suggest this symbolises Enoch's cosmic awareness. He lived one day for each day of the year, making his life a microcosm of the annual cycle. Others suggest it indicates he was taken at a cosmically significant moment, a point in the calendar determined by celestial mechanics rather than arbitrary timing. Or perhaps the number is clue to where he was taken, not to some abstract heaven, but to a place connected to solar observation, a station where the sun's movements could be tracked, a location from which cosmic cycles could be monitored and managed. The Book of Enoch describes him witnessing the mechanisms that control sun and moon, the gates through which they pass, the angels assigned to manage their movements. He didn't just hear about these things, he saw them, observed them directly. How? Unless he was taken to a place from which such observation was possible, a vantage point beyond Earth's surface, a station or structure or realm from which the solar system could be observed and managed. This sounds like science fiction. Ancient space stations, orbital platforms. But the text describes something, and the descriptions, while clothed in ancient language, suggest direct observation of phenomena that couldn't be seen from Earth's surface. The conspiracy doesn't require accepting alien intervention in the modern UFO sense. It simply requires accepting that something happened. Some entities with capabilities beyond normal human limits intervened in human affairs. They taught, they reproduced, they left physical and genetic evidence, and they had sufficient power to remove a witness who'd seen too much. Whether those entities were angels in the traditional religious sense, or beings from elsewhere using technology to seem divine, or something else entirely, the effect was the same: intervention, alteration of human development, and careful management of how much information about that intervention was allowed to persist. Enoch saw behind the curtain. He witnessed the mechanisms, he documented them, and he was taken to prevent that documentation from spreading uncontrolled through the human population of his time. The text survived, but in fragmented form through contested channels, marginalized by religious authorities, accessible only to those who specifically sought it out. The information leaked into human consciousness slowly, incompletely, in ways that could be dismissed as mythology or allegory. But the original witness, still gone, still missing, still taken. And unlike Elijah, whose ascension was witnessed by Elisha, who left behind a prophetic tradition that continued through his disciples, Enoch's departure was apparently solitary. No witnesses mentioned, no transfer of authority or prophetic office. He simply ceased to be present among humans. This suggests concealment rather than elevation. If his removal was meant to honour him, why no witnesses? Why no ceremony? Why no indication of his destination or status? The simplest explanation: he knew too much. And whatever entities controlled cosmic affairs decided that his continued presence among humans represented an unacceptable risk. So they took him, removed him from the human timeline, isolated him somewhere he couldn't spread what he knew, and they left behind only the fragments of his testimony that survived through channels they either couldn't control or chose to allow for reasons of their own. Epilogue. The witness still missing Enoch left no tomb, no shrine, no pilgrimage site where the faithful can connect with his memory. He left only words. Testimony recorded in a text that most religious authorities decided was too strange to be scripture, too detailed to be safe, too material to be mystical. The official story says he walked with God so faithfully that death was bypassed, translated directly to paradise as reward for righteousness. The conspiracy suggests he was isolated, removed from circulation because what he knew, and what he'd written down, was too disruptive to allow free propagation. Whether divine favour or cosmic containment, the result is the same. Enoch is missing, has been for millennia, taken at 365 years old, gone from Earth, present somewhere else, and the knowledge he preserved, available, documented in the Book of Enoch, describing watchers who descended and taught, Nephilim who resulted from forbidden unions, a cosmos structured like an administrative system rather than a mystery, technologies transferred rather than discovered, journeys to realms beyond Earth where cosmic mechanisms could be directly observed, all attributed to the man who was taken because he knew too much, or saved because he was righteous. The ambiguity is the point. One man's ascension is another's disappearance. One text's divine revelation is another's suppressed testimony. Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more. The question is, why? Was he elevated beyond mortality as a reward? Or was he removed from humanity as containment? The Book of Enoch offers its answer. The text was nearly lost, then rediscovered, then dismissed as apocryphal by most authorities while remaining sacred to some. But Enoch himself, still gone, still missing, still taken, no body, no grave, no physical remains to analyse or venerate or prove one interpretation over another. Just words describing things humans weren't supposed to know, entities descending from elsewhere, knowledge transferred rather than discovered, giants walking the earth before the flood, cosmic mechanisms observed from vantage points beyond Earth's surface, hierarchies and structures and systems where mystery should be, and a name in Genesis that breaks every pattern of the genealogical record. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Took, not rewarded, not elevated, took. The verb matters. It implies agency outside Enoch's control. Something was done to him, not something he achieved. He didn't ascend through spiritual merit. He was taken through external action. By whom? For what purpose? The text doesn't definitively answer. It presents a narrative, provides testimony, documents events. But the ultimate questions, who controls reality, why they intervene in human affairs, what their long-term objectives are, remain open. Enoch witnessed more than any other human of his era. He travelled farther, he saw deeper, he documented extensively, and then he vanished. Was this protection, keeping him safe from the destruction that would soon engulf the earth? Was this honour, elevating him beyond mortality as recognition of unique righteousness? Was this containment, isolating a witness whose knowledge threatened cosmic order? Each interpretation has supporting evidence. Each fits certain aspects of the text. None explains everything. What's certain, the man who walked beyond the world never came back. No return journey described, no reunion with family, no grave where his body could be laid to rest. He remains wherever he was taken, present somewhere in the cosmos, still alive if the text is to be believed, still witnessing perhaps, still recording what he sees. The man who documented forbidden knowledge, the man who travelled beyond Earth, the man who saw behind the curtain of reality and wrote down what he found there. Gone for millennia, missing from human history, present only through words that survived against long odds through contested channels. The Book of Enoch sits in libraries now, available to anyone curious enough to seek it out. The complete text, translated into modern languages, accessible with a few clicks or a library card. The information is no longer suppressed, no longer hidden, no longer restricted to Ethiopian monks or academic specialists. Anyone can read what Enoch claimed to witness. The Watchers descending, the forbidden teachings, the Nephilim terrorizing humanity, the cosmic journeys, the mechanisms underlying reality. And anyone can ask the same questions. Is this mythology, allegory, ancient science fiction, or is it testimony? Direct observation recorded by someone who actually saw what he claimed to see. The man who never died left behind a mystery that persists across millennia. A text that refuses to fit neatly into either religious or scientific frameworks. A narrative that suggests human history is stranger, more complex, more monitored than mainstream accounts acknowledge. Enoch walked with God, and then he was not, taken to somewhere unknown, for reasons only partially revealed, leaving behind only words to hint at what he saw, what he knew, and why that knowledge required his removal from human society. The witness is still missing. The testimony remains, and the questions persist. What did Enoch really see? Where was he taken? Why couldn't he return? And most importantly, what does his disappearance tell us about the true nature of reality, human history, and the entities that monitor our world from realms beyond our normal perception? The answers, if they exist, remain hidden, like Enoch himself, taken, gone, present somewhere in the cosmos, but inaccessible to those of us still bound to Earth's surface. The man who walked beyond the world never came back. Perhaps that was always the point, was. Hey everyone, before we dive into tonight's story, if you're enjoying the content, please consider using your hype points on this video. It helps the channel more than you possibly know and makes a real difference in keeping these stories coming to you. Also, drop a comment letting us know what time it is for you, and where in the world you're listening from, but only if you want to. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. It creates this amazing global community of truth seekers and curious minds. Now, let's get into tonight's investigation. There are places on Earth where the official story feels too clean, too rehearsed, like someone scrubbed the details until only the safe parts remained. Mount Shasta is one of those places. Rising over 14,000 feet above Northern California, it dominates the landscape like a frozen sentinel, beautiful and enigmatic. For over a century, stories have circulated about what lies beneath this mountain. Stories of underground cities, stories of ancient civilizations, stories that get dismissed as folklore, New Age fantasy, or the rambling of imaginative hikers who spent too long in thin air. But what if the dismissal is the cover-up? What if something beneath Mount Shasta forced the United States government to seal tunnels, confiscate research, and silence witnesses for nearly 90 years? This is the story of Harold Finnerty, a man who took his secrets to the grave. This is the story of his granddaughter Lila, who refused to let those secrets stay buried. And this is the story of what they found in the mountain. Something that challenges everything we think we know about human history. March 1979. The Deathbed Note. Harold Finnerty died on a grey morning in Ashland, Oregon. Heart failure, the doctor said. Quick and relatively painless for a man in his late 70s. He had lived a quiet life after retiring from the United States Geological Survey, tending a small garden, reading military history and keeping mostly to himself. His neighbours described him as polite but distant, the kind of man who never quite seemed at ease, even in his own home. His granddaughter Lila arrived 3 days after his death to help sort through his belongings. She had always been close to Harold, closer than most grandchildren manage with their grandparents. He had encouraged her curiosity, her questions, her refusal to accept simple answers to complex problems. As a child, she had asked him why the sky was blue, and instead of giving her the standard explanation, he had taught her about wavelengths and atmospheric scattering. That was Harold. He never dumbed things down. The house smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. Leela moved through the room slowly, feeling the weight of absence in every corner. Harold's desk sat near the window, covered in papers and notebooks. She began sorting them into piles: financial documents, personal letters, old survey maps from his USGS days. It was methodical work, the kind that keeps your hands busy while your mind processes grief. Then she found the envelope. It was tucked inside a locked drawer in the bottom of his desk, beneath a false bottom she only discovered because the drawer seemed too shallow compared to the others. The envelope was thick, made of heavy paper that had yellowed with age. Across the front, in Harold's precise handwriting, were words that made her stop breathing for just a moment. Mount Shasta. Do not open classified. Lila sat back in the chair, holding the envelope up to the light. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Harold had worked on dozens of geological surveys during his career. She'd seen his maps before, his field notes, his careful documentation of rock formations and water tables, but she'd never seen anything marked classified. The USGS did not deal in classified material. They mapped the Earth's surface. They studied earthquakes and volcanoes. They published their findings for other scientists to review. So why would her grandfather have a sealed envelope marked with government classification warnings? She broke the seal. Inside were 3 items. The first was a hand-drawn topographic map of Mount Shasta, rendered with the kind of precision that came from decades of professional cartography. The mountain's familiar silhouette was marked with contour lines, drainage patterns, and geological features. But there was something else. On the eastern side of the mountain, below the tree line, A location was marked with a red X and labelled in small, urgent letters, Adit 7, closed 1934. The second item was a series of photographs, black and white, badly faded. They showed the interior of what looked like a tunnel or cave. The walls appeared smooth, too smooth for natural rock formations. In one photograph, a hand was pressed against the wall for scale. The texture looked almost metallic, reflective in the harsh light of the camera flash. The third item was a handwritten note on a torn piece of paper. The mountain is hollow in the wrong places. They found something in 1934. We sealed it, but it wakes. Lila read the note 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Harold's handwriting, no question. But the words felt wrong, almost panicked. Harold had been a scientist, rational to his core. He did not write about mountains waking or hollow spaces in wrong places. He wrote about basalt layers and glacial movements and tectonic activity. She was still holding the note when she heard the vehicles pull up outside. 2 black SUVs parked in front of Harold's house. 4 men in dark suits emerged, moving with the kind of coordinated efficiency that suggested military or federal training. Lila watched from the window as they approached the front door. No badges visible, no agency identification. Just 4 men who knocked once, firmly, and then waited. She opened the door. "Miss Finnerty?" The man hissed. Front was tall, late 40s, with a face that gave away nothing. "We're here to collect materials related to your grandfather's work with the United States Geological Survey. It's standard procedure when a former employee with security clearance passes away." "Security clearance?" Lila kept her voice steady. "My grandfather was a cartographer. He mapped mountains." Nevertheless, the man's expression did not change. "We need to collect his notebooks, maps, and any documents related to his survey work. It will only take a few minutes." They were inside before she could protest. They moved through Harold's house like they had done this before, opening drawers, checking shelves, moving with practiced efficiency. They took his notebooks. They took his old survey equipment. They took boxes of papers from the garage that Lila had not even opened yet. The tall man noticed her watching. "This is routine, Miss Finnerty. Nothing to be concerned about." "Then why do you need his old maps?" "Government property. Technically, any work he did while employed by the USGS belongs to the federal government. We're just reclaiming what's ours." They were gone in less than 20 minutes. Lila stood in the now ransacked house, feeling like she had just been robbed by her own government. But they had not found the envelope. It was still in her jacket pocket, pressed against her chest like a secret heartbeat. That night she spread the map and photographs across her kitchen table and began to research. If someone wanted Harold's materials badly enough to confiscate them within days of his death, then those materials contained something worth hiding. She was going to find out what. The real history, they tell us, Mount Shasta has always been a mountain wrapped in mystery. For the indigenous Coverup, Shasta and Modoc peoples, it was a sacred place, home to the Great Spirit. White settlers arriving in the mid-1800s found themselves equally drawn to the mountain's imposing presence, and soon stories began circulating about what might lie beneath its snow-covered slopes. The Lemurian legend emerged in the late 1880s. According to the story, survivors of a lost continent called Lemuria, similar to Atlantis, had fled to Mount Shasta and established an underground city called Telos. These tall, white-robed figures would occasionally emerge to purchase supplies in nearby towns, paying with gold nuggets of unusual purity. In August of 1884, the San Francisco Chronicle published an account from a prospector named J.C. Brown, who claimed to have discovered an underground city carved into the mountain, complete with gold shields, hieroglyphs, and mummified remains of beings over 8 feet tall. The story captivated readers, though Brown mysteriously vanished before he could lead an expedition back to the site. By 1904, the legend had solidified with the publication of A Dweller on Two Planets, written by Frederick Spencer Oliver. The book described advanced beings living beneath Shasta, possessing technology far beyond human capability. It became a foundational text for the New Age movement and cemented Mount Shasta's reputation as a centre of mystical activity. But here is what the legends do not tell you. Here is the part that gets buried beneath the folklore and the New Age tourism. The United States Geological Survey began heavily mapping Mount Shasta in 1925. Teams of surveyors spent months in the field, documenting every ridge, every canyon, every geological formation. They returned in 1932 for more detailed work, and then again in 1934. Something happened during that 1934 survey. The official records are sparse, almost deliberately vague. A USGS team led by a geologist named Thomas Eldridge was conducting cave surveys on the eastern face of the mountain when they disappeared for 48 hours. When they finally emerged, their report mentioned disorientation and strange acoustics inside the cavern system. They noted that sounds echoed in ways that seemed impossible given the cave's dimensions, and they experienced unusual equipment malfunctions that they could not explain. The report was filed and then seemingly forgotten, except the surveying tunnels, designated Adit 1 through Adit 9, were all quietly sealed within months. The official reason given was structural instability and risk of collapse. No further surveys were conducted in that region for over 20 years. Then there was the aerial incident of 1945. During post-war mapping missions, United States Army Air Force pilots were conducting photographic surveys of the West Coast. One pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, documented an unusual observation in his flight log. While circling the south face of Mount Shasta, he noted what appeared to be an opening in the rock face that reflected light in a metallic manner. He circled back for a second pass and took additional photographs. The photographs exist. They are part of the official military archive. But the official explanation given was ice reflection, a play of light on glacial formations. The opening Lieutenant Webb documented does not appear on any current geological survey. When Lila Finnerty began researching these incidents, she was not looking for proof of underground cities or lost civilizations. She was looking for an explanation of why her grandfather would have a sealed envelope marked classified, and why federal agents would confiscate his materials within days of his death. What she found instead was a pattern of official interest, official secrecy, and official dismissal that stretched back almost 50 years. Harold Finnerty's shadow surveys. Lila spent 3 weeks in libraries and archives, chasing down references to her grandfather's work. His official employment record with the USGS showed steady, unremarkable service from 1948 through 1976. He had worked on surveys in California, Oregon, and Washington. He had published papers on volcanic geology and tectonic mapping. Everything was normal, documented, and publicly accessible, until she found the gaps. Between 1956 and 1959, Harold's official work record showed him assigned to routine topographic surveys in the Cascade Range. But when Lila requested the specific survey reports from that period, she was told that those documents were not available for public review. When she asked why, she was informed that they had been reclassified by the Department of Defense as part of Cold War security protocols. Why would basic geological surveys be classified for national security reasons? She started searching for anything Harold might have left behind that the federal agents had missed. She checked his house again, more carefully this time, looking for hiding places she might have overlooked. She found them in the garage, tucked inside the hollow leg of an old workbench. More notebooks. These were different from his official USGS field books. The pages were water-stained, the handwriting hurried, almost frantic in places. They were dated between 1956 and 1959, the exact years of the classified surveys. Lila spread them across her table and began reading. The surveys had been ordered by the United States Army Corps of Engineers, not the USGS. Harold had been temporarily assigned to a joint military-civilian team conducting what was officially described as seismic monitoring research. The Cold War was at its height. and the government was deeply concerned about detecting Soviet nuclear tests. Seismic stations were being established throughout the western United States to create an early warning network. But Harold's notes describe something else entirely. Subterranean resonance patterns inconsistent with known cave systems, he wrote on one page. Echoes suggest regular geometric spacing beneath primary cavern. On another page, thermal void pockets at depths that should not support such temperatures, heat source unknown. And then, circled in red ink, not natural. Lila felt something shift in her understanding. Her grandfather had not been mapping the surface of Mount Shasta. He had been mapping what was beneath it, and he had found something that should not exist. She kept reading. References to cyclopean geometry, a term usually reserved for massive ancient stonework like the walls of Mycenae or the temples of Malta. References to metallic signatures in soil samples. References to electromagnetic anomalies that interfered with surveying equipment. One entry from July 1958 was particularly striking. Descended into a Deet 7 with the team. The tunnel extends far beyond the 1934 seal. We broke through yesterday. The corridor beyond is not natural. The walls are too smooth. The angles are too precise. There is a smell like ozone and hot metal. The temperature rises as you descend. At the third junction, we found markings. Not native, not English, not any language we recognise. Lila stopped reading and sat back, her mind racing. Adit 7. The same designation marked on the map Harold had sealed in the envelope. There was more. Clipped to the back of one notebook was a photograph, black and white, badly faded. It showed 3 men standing in front of what looked like a tunnel entrance. The men wore field gear from the 1950s. Behind them, barely visible in the dim light, was a wall that looked too smooth to be natural rock. On the back of the photograph, someone had written 3 names: Harold Finnerty, James Pollock, Thomas Eldridge. Thomas Eldridge, the same name from the 1934 USGS team that disappeared for 48 hours. Lila grabbed her laptop and started searching. Thomas Eldridge had led the 1934 survey. According to newspaper archives, he had gone missing 3 months after returning from Mount Shasta. His body was never found. The official report called it a hiking accident, though no evidence of such an accident was ever documented. All of his maps and field notes had been seized by the Department of the Interior in October 1934. 24 years later, Harold Finnerty was working with a team that included Thomas Eldridge's name on the back of a photograph. Either the man had not died in 1934, or Harold had been studying Eldridge's original work. There was one more item in the notebooks that made Lila's hands tremble as she held it. A letter Harold had written, but apparently never sent, dated June 1952. The tunnels extend far beneath the volcanic shelf. Eldridge was right. The structure is artificial. The metal is older than the strata. I do not know what we have found, but I know it should not be here. I know that every instinct in me says we should seal this and walk away. But they will not stop. They need to know what it is, and I fear what will happen when they find out. Project Shas-2, the Cold War connection. It took Lila another month to find the binder. She discovered it in a storage unit Harold had rented under a false name, a detail she only uncovered because he had kept the key taped under the drawer of an old filing cabinet. The storage unit was in Reading, nearly 2 hours south of where Harold had lived. Inside were boxes of materials that the federal agents had missed, things Harold had clearly hidden away deliberately. The binder was labelled Shas-2, Cold War Seismic Anomaly Study, 1957. This was not folklore. This was not conspiracy theory. This was a real government document stamped with Department of Defense insignia, complete with project codes and authorization signatures. During the 1950s, the United States government genuinely did conduct extensive seismic and geological studies on West Coast volcanoes. The official purpose was monitoring for nuclear tests, creating a network of sensors that could detect underground explosions anywhere on the planet. Mount Shasta, as one of the tallest and most geologically active peaks in the Cascades, was a natural choice for such monitoring. But the Shasta binder contained information that went far beyond seismic monitoring. The first section documented equipment malfunctions in the Shasta region, magnetometers going haywire, seismographs recording vibrations that did not match any known geological activity, radio interference so severe that teams had to communicate using written notes because their walkie-talkies produced only static. The second section was titled Structural Analysis. Here, the language became more technical and more disturbing. Engineers described finding echo patterns that suggested large hollow spaces deep beneath the mountain, spaces that did not match known cave systems. The geometry was wrong. Natural caves form along fracture lines and water channels, creating irregular organic patterns. The spaces beneath Shasta formed regular geometric shapes. One page was marked with a red stamp, structural echoes unlike caves. Another page, metallic signature below basalt layers, and then, circled in black ink, do not breach. Layer 5, Layer 5. Lila flipped through the binder, looking for any reference to what Layer 5 might be. She found it near the back, in a section marked Recommendations. The language was bureaucratic, carefully neutral, but the message was clear. Further excavation beyond Layer 4 is not recommended. Preliminary analysis suggests that Layer 5 contains the primary anomaly source. Equipment failures increase significantly at depths below 1200 meters. Structural integrity of surrounding rock questionable. Team safety cannot be guaranteed. Translation: they found something deep in the mountain, and they were afraid to dig any deeper. The final item in the binder made Lila question everything she thought she understood about her government's relationship with the truth. It was a transcript, dated March 1971. The header read, Remote Viewing Session, Subject, Anomalous Geological Formation. Location, Northern California. Remote viewing. The CIA program that trained psychics to spy on Soviet installations by projecting their consciousness across space. Lila knew about Project Stargate. It had been declassified in the mid-1990s, revealed to the public as one of the strange artifacts of Cold War paranoia. The program officially began in 1972, but this transcript was dated 1971, a year before Stargate supposedly started. The transcript was formatted like an interview. Handler: please describe what you perceive at the target location. Viewer: 12. I see stone. No, not stone. Metal. It looks like metal but old. Very old. Covered in stone. Handler: can you describe the shape? Viewer: 12. A chamber. Big. The walls curve up like a dome. There are patterns on the metal. Symbols maybe. I cannot read them. Handler: where is this chamber located? Viewer: 12. Under snow. A tall mountain. North of Reading. Very deep. It is cold there, but the chamber is warm. There is something in the centre. It glows faintly. Handler: what is in the centre? Viewer: 12. I do not want to look at it. It feels wrong, like it is watching me even though I am not really there. Handler: please continue. Viewer: 12. A sphere, silver or grey. It sits on a pedestal. The pedestal is not human. The proportions are wrong. Everything about this place feels wrong. Whoever built this was not human. Handler: you're safe. The target cannot harm you. Continue. Viewer: 12. There are handprints on the wall near the entrance, pressed into the metal when it was soft. 5 fingers on the left hand, 6 fingers on the right. They are not human hands. The transcript ended there, stamped with a code. Session terminated. Viewer distress. Lila sat in the storage unit for a long time, holding the transcript in her hands. This was not legend. This was not folklore passed down through generations of New Age believers. This was a classified government document describing something beneath Mount Shasta that should not exist. Her grandfather had been part of the team that found it, and now she needed to find it herself. Finding Adit 7. Lila spent 2 months preparing. She was not a mountaineer, not a splunker, not trained for underground exploration, but she was Harold Finnerty's granddaughter, and she inherited his stubbornness along with his curiosity. She bought equipment, she studied maps, she read everything she could find about the eastern face of Mount Shasta, the McCloud region, the Mud Creek drainage area, and Dilla Canyon. Adit 7 had been sealed in 1934. According to mining records, it was one of 9 exploratory tunnels dug during a brief period when prospectors believed there might be valuable mineral deposits in the volcanic rock. The tunnels had been abandoned when no significant ore was found, and most had collapsed or been deliberately sealed due to safety concerns. But Harold's map showed that Adit 7 went deeper than the official records indicated. Much deeper. Lila drove to Mount Shasta in late October, when the tourist season had ended and the backcountry roads were mostly empty. She parked her truck near the old McCloud logging road and hiked in, carrying 60 pounds of gear on her back. The entrance to Adit 7 was supposed to be at roughly 8,000 feet elevation, hidden in a fold of rock near the tree line. It took her 3 days of searching to find it. The entrance had been buried under a rock slide, probably deliberately. Someone had piled stones across the opening and planted brush to hide it from casual hikers, but erosion had created a small gap at the top, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through if they were determined enough. Lila was determined enough. She wriggled through the gap, her headlamp cutting a narrow beam into the darkness beyond. The air inside was cold and dry, smelling of dust and stone. The tunnel stretched ahead, carved through volcanic rock, the walls rough and irregular. This was consistent with the mining tunnels from the 1930s, hand-drilled and blasted by men looking for gold or silver. She followed the tunnel down, descending into the mountain. After 50 yards, the character of the tunnel changed. The walls became smoother, the angles more precise. The temperature rose slightly, enough to notice. After 100 yards, she found the seal. It was a concrete wall, thick and professionally installed, completely blocking the tunnel. Stamped into the concrete was a date, November 1934. This was the official seal, the one placed after Thomas Eldridge's team reported their disorientation and strange experiences. But Harold's notes had said they broke through the seal in 1958. She examined the concrete wall carefully, running her hands over the surface, and then she found it. A crack, barely visible, running from floor to ceiling along the left side. Someone had cut through the concrete and then carefully sealed it again. The newer concrete was slightly different in colour, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Lila pulled out her tools and began chipping away at the newer section. The concrete was old enough to crumble easily under the impact of a hammer and chisel. It took her 2 hours, but she finally broke through. The tunnel beyond was different. The walls were smooth, almost polished. The rock looked melted rather than carved, like something impossibly hot had bored through the volcanic stone. The floor sloped downward at a steady angle, descending deeper into the mountain. Her headlamp beam reflected strangely off the walls, creating odd patterns of light and shadow. She walked for what felt like an hour, though her watch said only 20 minutes had passed. Time felt wrong down here. Sounds felt wrong too. Her footsteps echoed in ways that made no sense, sometimes loud, sometimes barely audible, as if the tunnel itself was changing its acoustic properties. The temperature continued to rise. By the time she reached the junction, it was uncomfortably warm, like being in a greenhouse on a summer day. She checked her thermometer. 85 degrees. That made no sense. She was deep inside a mountain that had snow on its peaks. It should be near freezing, not warm enough to make her sweat. The junction split into 3 passages. The centre passage was marked with a cairn of stones deliberately placed. Someone before her had marked the way. Harold? Thomas Eldridge? She did not know. She followed the centre passage. The walls here were not stone. They were metal. Smooth grey metal that looked old beyond measure, tarnished but not rusted. She reached out to touch it, and the surface was warm, almost body temperature. Patterns were etched into the metal, repeating geometric designs that looked almost like writing but followed no linguistic structure she recognised. This was what Harold had meant. This was what should not be here. Metal walls inside a volcanic mountain, warm to the touch, covered in symbols that predated any known language. She kept walking, and the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. The chamber beneath the mountain. The chamber was enormous. Lila's headlamp beam could not reach the far wall. The ceiling curved upward into a dome, just like Viewer 12 had described in the remote viewing transcript. The floor was made of the same grey metal, smooth and slightly warm beneath her boots. She pulled out a flashlight, a heavy-duty spotlight she had bought specifically for this expedition, and switched it on. The beam swept across the chamber, revealing its true size. It was easily 200 feet across, maybe more. The metal floor was inscribed with concentric circles, radiating outward from a central pedestal. Lila walked toward the centre, her footsteps echoing strangely in the vast space. The acoustics were wrong, just like the USGS report from 1934 had noted. Some sounds echoed loudly, bouncing off the curved walls. Other sounds were absorbed, deadened, as if the chamber itself was selectively filtering noise. Near the wall she found what the remote viewer had described. Handprints pressed into the metal, fossilised in whatever substance had been soft enough to take an impression before it hardened. The left hand had 5 fingers, the right hand had 6. The proportions were close to human, but not quite right. The fingers were longer, the palm narrower. Whoever had built this place was not human. Or if they were human in a way that predated everything anthropologists thought they knew about human evolution. The pedestal in the centre of the chamber rose about 4 feet from the floor. It was made of the same metal as everything else, but the surface was covered in more intricate patterns, symbols layered upon symbols in a way that suggested deep meaning if only you could read the language. On top of the pedestal sat a sphere. It was roughly the size of a basketball, perfectly smooth, made of metal that looked silver in her flashlight beam. The surface was covered in tiny inscriptions, spiralling around the sphere in lines so fine they were almost invisible. As Lila approached, she felt something shift in the air around her. A vibration, barely perceptible, like standing next to high-voltage power lines. This was the artifact Harold had sketched in his notebooks. This was what the government had sealed behind concrete and bureaucratic silence for nearly 50 years. Near the base of the pedestal, someone had left a metal plaque. The plaque was newer than the chamber, maybe from the 1950s based on the style of the lettering. It read, "Eldridge found the heart. We were never meant to open it." Lila stood there for a long time staring at the sphere. Every instinct told her not to touch it. The warnings in Harold's notes, the government's desperate attempts to seal this place, the plaque left by someone who clearly feared what they had discovered, all of it screamed danger. But she had come this far. She had broken through the seals. She had descended into the mountain. She needed to understand what this thing was. She reached out and touched the sphere. For a moment nothing happened. The metal was warm, warmer than the air around it, and the surface felt slightly rough, like fine sandpaper. Then the inscriptions began to glow. Faint blue light traced the spiral patterns, spreading from where her hand made contact outward, across the entire surface of the sphere. The vibration in the air intensified. Lila pulled her hand back, but the glow continued, growing brighter. The chamber itself seemed to respond, the walls humming with a low frequency that she felt in her chest more than heard with her ears. She checked her thermal reader. The temperature had spiked. The sphere was now registering at over 200 degrees, though it had not felt that hot when she touched it. The floor beneath the pedestal was glowing faintly, lines of light spreading outward along the concentric circles. Something beneath the chamber was waking up. Lila backed away from the pedestal, her heart hammering. This was not an artifact. This was not a relic of a dead civilization. This was a machine, still functional, still powered by something that had survived for thousands of years or longer. She needed to leave. Now. She ran back toward the tunnel entrance, the chamber's glow brightening behind her. The hum became a rhythmic pulse, mechanical and deliberate. Whatever she had activated was not shutting down. If anything, it was building towards something, a cycle that had been interrupted decades ago and was now resuming. Harold's final message. Lila made it back to her truck just as the sun was setting. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. She drove back to town, checked into a motel and collapsed on the bed, exhausted and terrified. That night she could not sleep. She kept hearing the hum from the chamber, that mechanical pulse that felt older than humanity itself. She kept seeing the glow spreading across the sphere, the light tracing patterns that might have been writing, or might have been something else entirely, some form of communication that humans were never meant to understand. She needed to know what Harold had thought about all this. She needed to hear his voice, his reasoning, his conclusions. She went back to the boxes of materials she'd taken from his storage unit and searched through everything one more time. She found the tape recorder buried at the bottom of a box of old survey equipment. It was an old reel-to-reel model from the 1970s, the kind Harold would have used for field notes. A single tape was still loaded on the reels. She pressed play. Harold's voice filled the room, older than she remembered, tired but clear. This is Harold Finnerty, recording on March 8th, 1979. If you are listening to this, it means I am dead, and it means you found what I have hidden. Good. Someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to understand what we found beneath Mount Shasta. In 1958, our team broke through the seal that Eldridge's team had placed in 1934. We descended into the mountain, following tunnels that should not exist, tunnels that were not created by natural geological processes or by human mining equipment. The tunnels led us to a chamber. Inside that chamber we found evidence of a civilization that predates anything in the archaeological record. The metal is older than the rock surrounding it. Carbon dating puts the surrounding basalt at roughly 300,000 years old. The metal cannot be dated using conventional methods, but analysis of the oxidation pattern suggests it is far, far older. Millions of years, perhaps. We found a machine. Not ruins, not artifacts. An active, functional machine built by intelligences we cannot comprehend. When we activated it, we triggered something. Seismographs across Northern California recorded vibrations that did not match any known seismic activity. The vibrations came from beneath Mount Shasta, rhythmic and mechanical, like something vast was coming back to life after sleeping for eons. We sealed it again. We had to. The government ordered us to bury everything we found, to seal the chamber, and never speak of it. They were afraid, not of what the public would think, but of what the machine might do if we continued to interfere with it. But here is what they did not understand. Here is what I did not understand until years later. The machine does not need us to activate it. It wakes on its own. Every few decades, seismographs pick up those same vibrations. They are always attributed to minor earthquakes, tectonic adjustments, volcanic activity. But I know better. The machine beneath Mount Shasta is not from a lost human civilization. It is older, it is alien, and it is waiting. I do not know what it is waiting for. I do not know what it will do when it fully awakens. I only know that we were never meant to find it, and we were certainly never meant to activate it. If you have listened to this tape, if you have found my notes and my maps, please understand the weight of what I am telling you. The truth is not what you think. The mountain is not what you think. And we are not alone in our history. The tape ended with a click. and the room fell silent. Lila sat there for a long time, processing what she had heard. Harold had known. He had known for over 20 years that something was beneath the mountain, something that challenged everything humanity believed about its place in the universe and its timeline on Earth. And now she had activated it again. The Coverup arrives. Lila checked out of the motel the next morning and started driving south. She planned to go to Sacramento, maybe find a journalist or a researcher who would take her evidence seriously. She had photographs. She had Harold's notes. She had the tape recording. Someone needed to know what was beneath Mount Shasta. She made it 20 miles before she noticed the black SUVs. There were 3 of them, travelling in formation, keeping a steady distance behind her. When she sped up, they sped up. When she slowed down, they matched her pace. They were not even trying to hide their presence. Lila pulled off the highway at a rest stop. The SUVs pulled in behind her. 6 men emerged, wearing the same dark suits and expressionless faces she'd seen at Harold's house. The man in front was tall, late 40s, with cold eyes that suggested he had done this many times before. He walked up to her truck window. "Miss Finnerty, we need you to come with us." "Who are you?" "That is not relevant. What is relevant is that you entered a restricted area yesterday. You accessed classified materials. You activated equipment that poses a significant security risk." "I do not know what you're talking about." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You saw the interior. That means you know too much. We can do this easily, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice." Lila looked at the 6 men surrounding her truck. She looked at the empty rest stop, no other vehicles in sight. She looked at the man's cold eyes and understood that she was not going to talk her way out of this. She needed to run. She started the truck, gunned the engine, and drove straight at the man in front of her. He dove aside and she swerved around the SUVs, accelerating back onto the highway. Behind her, the SUVs scrambled to follow. She drove fast, faster than she'd ever driven, weaving through traffic, taking exits at random, trying to lose them in the maze of back roads. But they stayed with her, coordinated and relentless. These were professionals. They had resources she could not match. She remembered the side tunnels. When she had explored Adit 7, she had seen other passages branching off from the main corridor. Some led deeper into the mountain. Some led back toward the surface. If she could get back to the mountain, she could lose them in the tunnels. She turned north, heading back toward Mount Shasta. The SUVs followed. She drove up the old logging road, her truck bouncing over ruts and rocks, pushing the vehicle far beyond what it was designed for. She reached the area near Adit 7 just as the sun was setting. She abandoned the truck and ran into the forest, carrying only a small backpack, with her flashlight and Harold's most important notes. Behind her she heard doors slamming, men shouting, engines revving. They were coming. She made it to the rock slide covering Adit 7 and squeezed through the gap. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness as she ran down the tunnel, descending into the mountain. She heard voices behind her, echoing strangely in the confined space. She ran past the broken seal, past the junction, into the smooth metal corridors that should not exist. The men were still following, but they were slowing down, cautious now. They knew what was down here. They knew it was dangerous. Lila found one of the side passages and ducked into it, switching off her flashlight. She crouched in the darkness, listening. Footsteps echoed past her hiding spot, moving toward the central chamber. Radio static crackled, voices speaking in clipped military jargon. She waited in the darkness for what felt like hours. Eventually the footsteps retreated. The voices faded. She was alone again, deep inside Mount Shasta, surrounded by metal walls that hummed with ancient power. She found another passage that led upward, following the natural slope of the mountain. It took her 3 hours of climbing through narrow tunnels, but eventually she emerged on the northern face of the mountain, miles from where she'd entered. Behind her she heard helicopters. She looked back and saw lights converging on the Adit 7 region. Heavy machinery was being brought in. They were sealing it again, just like they had in 1934 and again in 1958. But this time, they were not taking any chances. She heard explosions echoing across the mountain. They were collapsing the tunnels completely. The final revelation. 3 months later, Layla received a small package at a post office box she had rented under a false name. There was no return address. Inside was a fragment of metal, grey and smooth, warm to the touch even though it had been sitting in a cold mail facility. The metal was identical to the walls of the chamber beneath Mount Shasta. Wrapped around the metal was a note written in Harold's handwriting. The machine inside Shasta is not from a lost human civilization. It is older. It is waiting. Do not let them bury the truth again. But this made no sense. Harold had died before Lila ever entered the mountain. He could not have sent this package, unless he had prepared it years ago, setting up some kind of delayed delivery system, unless he had known she would go looking for answers, or unless the note was not from Harold at all. Lila spread out all her remaining evidence on her apartment floor. The photographs, the notes, the tape recording, Harold's maps, the metal fragment. She had spent 3 months in hiding, moving from town to town, afraid that the men in black SUVs would find her again. But they had not come. Maybe they thought the evidence had been destroyed. Maybe they thought she would stay silent out of fear. They were wrong. That night, the mountain rumbled. Local seismographs picked up vibrations centered directly beneath Mount Shasta. The frequency was low, rhythmic, almost mechanical. Geologists attributed it to minor tectonic adjustments. Volcanic activity settling after decades of dormancy. Nothing to be concerned about. But Lila knew better. She had heard that rhythm before, deep in the chamber, when she had touched the sphere and felt something vast wake beneath her feet. The machine was still active. The seals had not stopped it. The explosives had not buried it deeply enough. Whatever was beneath Mount Shasta, whatever Harold and Thomas Eldridge and countless others had found over the decades, it was older than human civilization. It was patient, and it was waking. No earthquake was officially reported that night, even though thousands of people across Northern California felt the tremor. The United States Geological Survey issued no statements. No warnings were given. The incident was not recorded in any official database. But Lila had felt it. She had felt the pulse of something ancient stirring beneath the mountain, counting down to a moment when it would fully awaken. And when that moment came, the government's carefully maintained silence would no longer matter. The truth beneath Mount Shasta would reveal itself, whether humanity was ready for it or not. Some mountains hold secrets in their stone. Some mountains hold mysteries in their caves. But Mount Shasta holds something else entirely. It holds evidence of intelligences that walked this earth long before we did, and it holds machines that still function after millions of years of silence. Harold Finnerty died trying to warn us. Thomas Eldridge vanished trying to understand it. Lila Finnerty risked everything to uncover it. The question is not whether the truth will come out. The question is what will happen when it does. The mountain remembers, the machine remembers, and deep beneath the snow and stone and ancient metal, something is waking, something is waiting, something is counting down the years until it emerges from the darkness and shows humanity just how small and young we really are in the vast timeline of this planet. Mount Shasta stands silent against the sky, beautiful and enigmatic. But if you listen carefully, if you place your hand against the stone and feel for vibrations that should not be there, you might just sense it. The rhythm, the pulse, the heartbeat of something older than human memory. And you might realize, as Harold did, as Lila did, that we were never alone on this earth. We just forgot to look beneath the mountains